And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is your ultimate guide to lands in Commander. I'm being a tad disingenuous here because this actual video isn't the ultimate guide. I've already done the top 30 colorless utility lands in the format, so I have that video available already. And I've done a video on all the lands available to all the different monocolored decks. The links for all of those will be in the description as well. So even though I'm not talking about all of the lands on this specific video, that would be really difficult to do in a single video. I'm also going to have a playlist for all of the lands that I've talked about in this video and others. However, notice I did not call this the complete guide to lands in Commander, and that's because I'm not talking about all the lands. I'm just talking about the ones that I think are significant. Also, I'm just talking about utility lands. I'm talking about lands that do stuff. If it's just a land that adds mana, or if it's mana fixing, I'm not talking about any of this stuff. Everyone knows the dual lands exist, I think. Everyone knows fetch lands exist. I don't think we need to talk about those. How you mana fix in Commander, I think probably would be a separate video. This is just, here are your options for lands depending on the deck that you're playing. And of course, color identity is always a huge decider in this format. So I'm doing this by color combination, and I'm starting out with Azorius. So these are the lands that you can put in your Azorius deck or in any deck that has white and blue, of course. Starting out with Celestial Colonnade, it enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add a white or a blue, and you can pay 3 white, blue until end of turn. Celestial Colonnade becomes a 4/4 white and blue elemental creature with flying and vigilance. Probably the best man land out there, one of the best man lands. I mean, a 4/4 flying vigilance creature is fantastic, really good in a control deck. I haven't really seen this card ever in a Commander game. It's sort of a little notorious in other formats. Can still be good though. Next up is Gates of Istfell. Enters the battlefield tapped, and you tap to just add a white. However, the activated ability is white and blue. 2 white, blue, blue, so of course it can only go in a deck with white and blue. And you tap and sacrifice it, you gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. That's pretty darn good. This is a card that I don't see nearly enough. It could go in any white-blue deck, I think, because gaining 2 life and drawing 2 cards later in the game can be really helpful sometimes. Next up is Moorland Haunt. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay white and a blue and tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard. Create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. This is just an auto-include, I think, if you're in a Spirit Tribal deck. You know, that's in white and blue. These are sort of the spirit colors, I think, if you're playing Spirit Tribal. Even if you're in a Kaikar deck, this could be great, right? You can create that spirit token and then sacrifice to add mana. Next up, Prav, Spires of Order. And for whatever reason, this is not a legendary land, although it probably should be. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay 4 white, blue, and tap. Prevent all damage a source of your choice would deal this turn. So this is a really bad Maze of Ith, essentially. I mean, it's not a Maze of Ith because you can use this on any source, so it is, you know, I mean, if you're going to get shot to the face by an Aetherflux Reservoir, this will save your life. So in a way, it can be better than a Maze of Ith or any of those other effects. 6 mana is a lot. However, you can have in an Azorius deck at least a few lands that produce colorless mana, and maybe if you got a guy in your playgroup who likes to play Aetherflux Reservoir, this is a way to get around that. And lastly, for our Azorius lands is Seaside Haven. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay white and a blue and tap, sacrifice a bird, draw a card. So again, if you're in a bird tribal deck, I think this is just an auto include. It's particularly good with Derevi. Like if I'm playing a Derevi deck, if I'm not playing bird tribal at all, I probably will put Seaside Haven in there, right? Because Derevi has that cheating commander tax ability, right? And later in a game, if you get dry on cards, you can just sacrifice your Derevi, draw a card because it's a bird, it goes back to the command zone, and because you don't have to pay the commander tax, you can just pay the 4 to get it out. You can kind of keep doing that, so it sort of becomes pay 6 mana, draw a card, which is not fantastic, but it's better than nothing, right? Next up is Boros. So the Boros lands, we have Axgard Armory. Again, these lands that came out in Kaldheim, these 2-color lands, I think really deserve more play. There's some of them are fantastic. Enters the battlefield taps to add a white, and you can pay 1 red, white, and tap, sacrifice Axgard Armory, search your library for an aura card and or an equipment card, reveal and put in your hand, then shuffle. I mean, this is just an auto include. If you're in any of those Boros, aura, and and or equipment decks, for which there are many. Next up, Needle Spires. Enters the battlefield taps to add a red and a white, and you can pay 2 red, white. Needle Spires becomes a 2/1 red and white elemental creature with double strike until end of turn. It's still a land. I mean, it adds both colors that you need. So, you know, a lot of people will put lands in their deck that have no upside at all just because they add the 2 colors that they need. This adds the 2 colors you need, and then it has also the upside of turn it into a creature, got double strike, so if I'm in that Boros or equipment deck, I can just chuck a couple equipment on this and it's going to do some serious damage, so it can be great there. Speaking of which, Sunhome Fortress of the Legion, again, not a legendary land for whatever reason, taps to add a colorless, and you can pay 2 red and a white and tap. Target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Again, so just now I can give any of my creatures double strike with this. Pretty fantastic, I think. Can go in any of those Boros decks where you want to be attacking all the time, or even if you just want to give your commander double strike, this can be really good, right? Another fantastic fit in the same theme is Slayer's Stronghold. Tap to add a colorless, and you can pay red and a white. Tap, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains vigilance and haste until end of turn. Giving a creature haste, you know, there's not a lot of lands that you can use to give a creature haste. This is one of them. +2/+0 and vigilance as well. This can be a really great card that you can just throw in any Boros deck where you're attacking all the time. Next up is Golgari, and we're starting out with Hissing Quagmire. Enters the battlefield tap, and you can tap to add a green or a black and pay 1 black-green. Hissing Quagmire becomes a 2/2 black and green elemental creature with death touch until end of turn. This one I particularly like. This is the one that I really try to find room if I can throw it in my Golgari decks, because having a creature with death touch, man, that can be sneaky good. I say all the time that I think death touch is so good in a commander game. You have this guy just sitting there, you know, it's a land, your opponents aren't really paying attention to it. They attack into you with their big nasty creature, and you just quickly turn this into a 2/2 with death touch. You chump and they lose their big creature. I really like having a man land with death touch on it. Next up, Grim Backwoods. Tap to add a colorless, and you can pay 2 black and a green. Sacrifice a creature, draw a card. I mean, pretty self-explanatory there, right? There's a whole lot of Golgari decks that I think could definitely use this card that are sacrificing their creatures all the time. Next up, Skemfar Elderhall. Enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap to add a green and pay 2 black, black, green. Tap, sacrifice Skemfar Elderhall up to 1 target creature you don't control gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Create 2 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens. Activate only as a sorcery. So it's a land that can kill a creature. That I really like. Having a land that can kill creatures is really, really handy sometimes. Also creates those elf tokens. Obviously, this is probably an auto include in a black and green elf deck, for which there are a few out there. I know those tokens are elf tokens, but if you're in any sort of sacrifice theme in Golgari, it can be great there as well. Next up, Svegthos the Restless Tomb. I'm sure I said that wrong. Tap to add a colorless 3 black and green until end of turn. Svegthos the Restless Tomb becomes a black and green plant zombie creature with this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Very interesting man land here. I mean, it's a plant and a zombie, so that can be significant if you're in either of those themes. Power and toughness equal the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Obviously, we know this is going to fit well in a graveyard themed deck where you got lots of creature cards in your graveyard, like Marin deck possibly. So it could be a good inclusion there. But moving on to Izzet. And first up for Izzet is Desolate Lighthouse. Tap to add a colorless, pay 1 blue and a red, and tap and draw a card, then discard a card. So a land that loots. You know, it's just always great to have an ability like this on a land. Any sort of a dead draw, or you're drawing lands, things you don't need, just loot, get something better. Also great in any scenario where you actually want to be discarding and taking advantage of that as well. Of course, this goes in so many decks. Next up, Nivix, Airy of the Firemind. Taps to add a colorless, pay 2 blue and red and tap. Exile the top card of your library. Until your next turn, you may cast it if it's an instant or sorcery spell. Interesting card. You know, I've never seen this in a commander game before. I think if you had a spell slinger instant and sorcery deck, you could just throw this in there. You know, it is card advantage. It also can just get something off the top of your library if you want to do that as well. Next up, Wandering Fumarole. Enters the battlefield tapped. Tap to add a blue or red, and you can pay 2 blue red until end of turn. Wandering Fumarole becomes a 1/4 blue and red elemental creature with pay 0 and switch its power and toughness until end of turn. So it can become a 4/1. You know, this for me is probably the worst manland in this cycle. This one you do not see very often. However, it is an elemental. Keep that in mind. So if you're in a blue-red elemental theme, this could be a good fit. Also, again, it's adding the blue and the red you need. So if you're in a blue-red deck and you just need lands that add both colors, this will do that, and then also gives you that little bit of an advantage as well. Next up, Surtland Frostpyre. Enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it to add a red and pay 2 blue-blue-red, tap and sacrifice Surtland Frostpyre. You scry 2, then it deals 2 damage to each creature. Activate only as a sorcery. This one I really like. I have not seen this in a Commander game yet. I sort of gushed over it a little bit when it came out in Kaldheim at the start of the year. It is a board wipe on a land. You just never see that, right? And I think that's very unique that way. I mean, it's only 2 damage. Nevertheless, dealing 2 damage to each creature on a land is really unique. I like this card a lot. Next up is Rakdos, and we are starting out with Immersturm Skullkarn. Again, from the Kaldheim cycle, enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap to add a black and pay 1 black, red, red, tap and sacrifice. It deals 3 damage to target player. That player discards a card. Activate only as a sorcery. So again, if I'm in a Rakdos discard theme, I guess this is probably an auto include, right? Next up, Rix Maddie, Dungeon Palace. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay 1 black, red, tap. Each player discards a card. Activate only as a sorcery. So again, if you're in that discard theme, this just seems fantastic. It's going to help keep your opponent's hands empty. Can also give you the advantage of discarding if you want to. Next up, Lava Claw Reaches. Enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap to add a black or red and pay 1 black red until end of turn. Lava Claw Reaches becomes a 2/2 black and red elemental creature with pay X. This creature gets +X/+0 until end of turn. So that's interesting. Again, another man land. Pumpable though, which is interesting. And lastly for Rakdos, Stensia Bloodhull. Taps to add a colorless. You can pay 3 black red and tap. Stensia Bloodhull deals 2 damage to target player or planeswalker. It doesn't sacrifice itself. You can repeatedly use this. I like the fact that you can hit planeswalkers with this. If you're in a play group where, you know, your buddies like to play Super Friends decks, just being able to deal 2 damage to a planeswalker and get it off the table can be really handy. So some consideration there for this land. Next up, we have the Simic lands, starting out with Alchemist's Refuge. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay blue and a green and tap. You may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. That's very usable. No question about that. This card I do see quite a bit in Commander games. Again, it just fits in your deck wherever you can find room. Doesn't enter the battlefield tap. It's not really going to slow you down. And if at any point you want to cast something with flash, you can do so. Maybe your commander, right? There's a lot of commanders like maybe a Damia Sage of Stone that you don't want to have to play it and then wait till your next upkeep. You want to get it out on your opponent's end step so you can draw those cards right away. Definitely fits into a lot of decks. Next up, Littjara Mirror Lake, and this is probably my favorite one from the Kaldheim cycle. Enters the battlefield tap. You can tap to add a blue, and you can pay 2 green, green, blue, and tap. Sacrifice Littjara Mirror Lake. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Activate only as a sorcery. That's a fantastic ability that you can put in any deck and is always going to be good for you. This card went right into my Tishana deck instantly as soon as I saw it, because that is a sort of an ETB, create token copies of my creatures, so it was a perfect fit in that deck. Really though, you could put it in any deck. I mean, just creating a token copy of your creature and then it gets an additional +1/+1 counter on top of that, so it fits in +1/+1 counter themes as well. I think this is a really great land. Next up, Novingian Heart of Progress. Again, not a legendary land for whatever reason. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay blue and a green and tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that entered the battlefield this turn. That's a very usable ability. Again, speaking of the +1/+1 counter theme, for which there are lots of those in Simic, this probably is an auto include in those decks, I would imagine. Next up, Lumbering Falls enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap to add a blue or green. Pay 2 blue, green. Lumbering Falls becomes a 3/3 green and blue elemental creature with hexproof until end of turn. So this is another one of my favorites when in this manland cycle. Again, because hexproof is such a very usable ability. Next up is our Selesnya lands, and we are starting out with Bredegard's Stronghold. Enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap to add a green. Pay green, white, white, and sacrifice Bredegard's Stronghold. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures you control. They gain vigilance and lifelink until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So this card's an auto include in a Lathiel deck, I think, because you are both doing a +1/+1 counters theme there, and the lifelink means the life gain theme as well. So it definitely fits into that deck, fits into any of those white and green +1/+1 counters decks, for which there's a bunch of those as well. This is another card that could just auto include in any of those decks that I think probably should see a lot more play in the format. Speaking of which, Gavany Township is probably the #1 land for this sort of strategy. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay 2 green and a white and tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Simple as that. Really great card, super fantastic in any of those +1/+1 counter themes, but really just great in any creature heavy deck. I mean, putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures over and over and over again is always going to be great in any deck. Next up, Grove of the Guardian. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay 3 green and a white and tap. Tap 2 untapped creatures you control, sacrifice Grove of the Guardian, create an 8/8 green and white elemental creature token with vigilance. Very interesting card. So you have to pay 5 mana and tap 2 untapped creatures you control and sacrifice it. An 8/8 elemental token with vigilance, though, that's no slouch. That is a big creature. Can be great in a populate theme. So now you have this big token that you can populate. And if you're in any theme where you're creating lots of tokens already and you have an Anointed Procession or a Parallel Lives or something, now you're going to get 2 of these. So that's pretty fantastic. I think this card could definitely see more play. It doesn't look like much on its face, but I think it fits nicely into a couple of different strategies. Next up is Nantuko Monastery. Taps to add a colorless, and if you have Threshold, which means 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you can pay green and a white, and Nantuko Monastery becomes a 4/4 green and white insect monk creature with first strike until end of turn. It's still a land, so very interesting. You know, it's an insect and a monk, which is a very weird combination. So I don't know if anyone out there has a green and white insect deck or a green and white monk deck. This might fit there. It also has first strike, so a 4/4 creature with first strike for only 2 mana. That's pretty darn good. Next up, Stirring Wildwood. Enters the battlefield tap. You can tap to add a green or a white, and you can pay 1, a green and a white. Till end of turn, Stirring Wildwood becomes a 3/4 green and white elemental creature with reach. So again, another manland option if you're in Selesnya colors. 3/4 with reach, that's pretty darn good. You know, again, only 3 mana, right? This is a cheap one. 3 mana is not a lot. And again, if you're in a deck where you want to be looking for lands that are going to give you both of your colors, why not throw this one in there, right? And our final one for this color group, Vitu-Ghazi, the City Tree. Again, not a legendary land, even though it definitely should be. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay 2 white and a green, and tap, create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. So great in any Saproling deck if you're in a green-white Saproling deck, or if you're in a green-white deck, again, token theme, or I just want lots of creatures in play. I have this in my Shanna deck because that's what I want to be doing, right? Just creating more and more creatures so that my Shanna gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Not a lot of downside here. Doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. I think this card could definitely go in a lot of decks. We're moving on to our Gruul lands, and starting off Gruul with Contested Cliffs. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay red and a green and tap, target beast creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. So that's a really fantastic ability on a land. If you're in a beast tribal deck, this is an auto include, I think, right? Also, if you are in an Aluna Apex of Wishes deck, that is a red-green beast commander. Gahiji Honored One is a red-green beast commander. Marith Will of the Wild is a red-green beast commander. And Uriel the Miststalker is a red-green beast commander. I think it's an auto include in that deck, right? Just use it to remove your opponent's creatures. I think it could definitely go in a lot more decks, not just beast tribal, but also my commander is a beast. Next up, Notvold Slumber Mound, and this is the Gruul edition from the Kaldheim cycle. Enters the battlefield tapped, taps to add a red, and you can pay 3 red, green, green, and tap, sacrifice Notvold Slumber Mold, destroy target land, create a 4/4 green troll warrior creature token with trample. So pretty high price there, right? You got to pay 6, and then this land as well. So you got to have at least 7 lands in play, I think. Destroying a land is always good. Creating a 4/4 green troll warrior with trample, that's not bad. You know, it's doing a couple different things, which I like. I really like that you get, maybe I want to destroy a land, or maybe I need a creature as a blocker or an attacker. So I think this card could definitely go in a few decks. Next up, Kessig Wolf Run, and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this one. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay X, green, and a red, and tap, target creature gets +X/+O and gains trample until end of turn. Pretty self-explanatory, fits in a lot of decks. If you got a ton of mana, this is a great way to use it. If you just want to make your commander a lot bigger, but more importantly, give it trample. That can be really important with a lot of commanders. Next up, Skarg the Rage Pits. This one's a little lesser known, but similar to Kessig Wolfrun, you tap to add a colorless and you can pay red and a green, tap, target creature gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. So you don't get that huge pumping effect where you can just dump a bunch of mana into it, but just pay 2 mana and give a creature +1/+1 and trample. Again, the trample part I think is the most important thing here if you have a commander that you want to be giving it trample because it's really big or because you want to be getting in for damage. Next up, Raging Ravine. Enters the battlefield tapped, taps to add a red or green, and you can pay 2 red green. Until end of turn, Raging Ravine becomes a 3/3 red and green elemental creature token with, whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's still a land. That's a very interesting ability. You know, if you are in a red-green +1/+1 counter theme, like Grumgully, for example, I think this is a great fit there. Also a great fit in a Wolfguard deck, right? If anyone's got a Wolfguard deck, that has that doubling the attack trigger ability on it, and this is an attack trigger, right? Whenever this creature attacks. So now you're going to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and those counters stick around, right? You're going to get the 2 +1/+1 counters. It'll turn back into a land at the end of your turn, and then on your next turn you can do it again, and it'll get even bigger. Now it'll be a 7/7 when it attacks. That's pretty darn decent. Also avoids the board wipes, right? So it can be great there as well. Next up is Dimir, and the Dimir lands are starting out with Creeping Tar Pit. Enters the battlefield tapped. Taps to add a blue or a black. You can pay 1 blue-black. Creeping Tar Pit becomes a 3/2 blue and black elemental creature token until end of turn and can't be blocked. And this is, again, a really significant one. You know, the fact that it can't be blocked can be really, really important. If you're in a deck where you want to be getting in for damage all the time, it can be great there. You could even throw this in your Yuriko deck. If you want to get your Yuriko into play, right, you can just turn it into an unblockable creature, attack, use that ninjutsu because you know it's not going to be blocked, return a land to your hand, and then just replay the land. Next up, Duskmantle, House of Shadow. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay blue and a black. Target player mills a card. So milling 1 card, not fantastic, but I mean, it is only 2 mana. You could also play Nephilia Drownyard. Tap to add a colorless, and you can pay 1 blue and a black, and target player mills 3 cards. So a little bit better. You know, if I'm in a Dimir milling theme, I would probably play both of these cards, I think. Speaking of milling, we got Port of Carfell. Enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap to add a blue, and you can pay 3 blue, black, black, tap, sacrifice Port of Carfell, mill 4 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That's a pretty powerful ability. I mean, 6 mana. Again, you're tapping this as well, so it's technically 7. Mill 4 cards if you're already in that theme. It fits great. Gyruda deck, I think this is maybe an auto include. It's doing exactly the same kind of thing that you're doing there. I mean, putting a creature card from your graveyard into the battlefield tap can be really powerful ability on a land. It doesn't have to be one of the 4 cards you milled. It can be any creature that's already in your graveyard, right? So this card can fit in a lot of decks. I really like this Kaldheim cycle in general. I don't think it gets played nearly enough. Speaking of which, we're doing the Orzhov lands now, and we are starting off with, again, the Kaldheim edition, which is Great Hall of Starnheim. Enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap to add a black. Pay white, white, and black. Sacrifice Great Hall of Starnheim and a creature you control. Create a 4/4 white angel warrior creature token with flying and vigilance. Activate only as a sorcery. Man, this card would be so much better if you didn't have to activate only as a sorcery because you could just use it in response to one of your creatures already dying. However, it is a land that is sacrificing a creature. Orzhov likes to play those aristocrat style of decks a lot. You can also put this in an angel theme if you're in a white-black angel theme as well. Next up, Shambling Vent. Enters the battlefield tap, and you can tap to add a white or black, and you can pay 1 black and white. Shambling Vent becomes a 2/3 white and black elemental creature with lifelink until end of turn. And again, the lifelink is the important part there, right? So now, if I'm in a black and white deck that's gaining life, and there are a bunch of those, this is a great way to get that life gain trigger, right? There's lots of things that you're going to get off of triggering life gain. You can just pay 1 white, black, and attack with this guy. Even if he gets blocked and dies, you're still going to gain the life, so you're going to get that trigger. So I think it's probably an auto include in any white-black deck where you're gaining life. Next up, Starlit Sanctum. Speaking of auto includes, if you're in a cleric theme, this is, I think, as well is an auto include for you. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay white and tap, sacrifice a cleric. You gain life equal to the sacrifice creature's toughness, or you can pay black and tap, sacrifice a cleric. Target player loses life equal to sacrifice creature's power. Pretty fantastic. If you're in any deck where you're in a cleric theme, I think white and black are probably the best colors for a cleric tribal. If you're in that aura deck, this is just an absolute auto-include, of course. But again, even if you're in a deck where your commander is a cleric, you might want to give this consideration, right? Because, you know, my commander's going to die anyway. Why not sacrifice it to gain life, or sacrifice it to have another player lose life? So you might want to give it consideration there as well. Last up for Orzhov, and this is a great one, Vault of the Archangel. Taps to add a colorless, and you can pay 2 white, black, and tap creatures you control gain Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. That's really fantastic. And again, I love the combination of maybe I want to give my creatures the Lifelink because I want to gain a bunch of life. Maybe I'm low on life, or maybe I'm in a life gain theme. Also, they're going to get Death Touch though, which means they're going to be hard to block. Your opponents aren't going to want to block them, so it's a great way to get in for damage. It's also a great way to, again, sort of surprise your opponents where they're attacking you. Now you can give all your little 1/1 creatures Death Touch, and you're going to lose your creatures, but so are they as well. Really, really great card that I think can go in a ton of decks. There are no 3-color utility lands. For anyone who is interested, there's also no 4-color utility lands, right? I'm just talking about the lands that do stuff, not only add mana. And there is only one 5-color land. So this is the last land on this list here, and it's the World Tree. Enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap to add a green. As long as you control 6 or more lands you control have. Add 1 mana of any color. And I just think that's particularly fantastic. You know, I've done a couple of Deck Doctor videos for my patrons who had 5-color decks. And what I told them is, man, this just seems like the best way to mana fix if you're in a 5-color deck. You know, if you're going to put a lot of land dig in your deck already, so why not put Sylvan Scrying or Expedition Map or Tempt with Discovery or something like that, where I can just go get my World Tree and then I'm good. Forget about that second ability, just I go get World Tree, put it into play, and now I'm just mana fixed for the rest of the game. But of course, it has this other ridiculous ability, which is the reason it's a 5-color land. You can pay white, white, blue, blue, black, black, red, red, green, green, and tap, sacrifice the World Tree, search your library for any number of God cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So really interesting ability. Obviously, a lot of people, when this land first came out, were trying to make decks built around this. This is definitely a powerful enough ability where you could do that if you're in God Tribal already, which a lot of people do decks like this. This is obviously an auto include there. If I'm in a 5-color deck and I have this in here because I want a mana fix, I might just throw a couple of gods in there on the off chance that I use this ability, like maybe throw an Athreos or a Keranos or something, or a Crufix in your deck, whichever ones actually help what you're doing, just on the off chance that, hey, maybe late in the game I can sacrifice this and go grab, even if you grab 2 or 3 gods and put them directly into play, I think it would totally be worth it. You don't have to grab 30. Just grabbing a few can be really good. But that is it. That is my ultimate guide to lands in Commander. Again, as I said, I'm only dealing with the utility lands here, right? I'm dealing with the lands that do stuff, not just mana fix you or add mana. And I also have the links for all those other videos. So you got your colorless options, which of course can go in any deck. And then you have all the mono-colored ones. And then this video is essentially all of the multicolored ones, right? I was just going to call this video your multicolored land options for Commander, but I thought I would just sort of bring it all together so that if you are building a deck, you can click on this video, skip to the deck color combination that you are making, click on the links below for all the mono-colored lands and the colorless utility lands, and really see all of your options for what you can put in that deck. Because a lot of people, I think, miss out on a lot of these really great abilities, which it doesn't really have a lot of downside. And then later in the game, it can be really fantastic for me. Utility lands really can beef up the productivity and the power level of your deck. So hope you enjoyed the video, but that is it for today. And thanks for tuning in.